All right, so thank you for coming, everybody. It's kind of a smaller than usual group, but it's great that it's kind of more interesting. So Chris Sterling is our presenter this evening. He brings a lot of industry experience to the table and has recently written a book, and I highlighted it so I don't get it wrong. Managing Software Debt, Building for Inevitable Change. Is that correct? And who among us aren't familiar with feature creep? So it should be a really interesting thing. And thank you for coming. Yeah, and I'll leave the credentials and everything else to you. At the end of the show, we do have a drawing for a door prize. It's $25 gift certificate to Starbucks, and the presenter traditionally makes that drawing. So stick with us. So,
yeah, I can be bought.
Yeah. So thank you for coming.
I hope you don't mind me sitting down. I just noticed that there's a chair here. It's kind of nice. So I'll start off with a story. Just a little bit about me. I co-founded a company. It's Agile Advantage. Did that after I've been in software development for quite a long time. Pretty much every role. I play everything, and been on teams, developer, project manager, product manager, anything else I can think of. And one of the things that I come to know is that software has become much more relevant to business nowadays than ever. And it's treated in a way that I don't think is valuable to business. It's not treated as an asset, it tends to be treated as a cost. It's a cost of doing business. And so one of the things I'm looking to do, and what my passion is around, is actually helping companies leverage their software assets more effectively. So rather than treating it like a cost, they should leverage them for better gains and better value. And so at least be an investment that they're constantly keeping track of. So we started a company. I did a lot of, if you're familiar with Agile software development, I'm a certified Scrum trainer. Been a certified Scrum trainer since 2006. Taught a lot of classes, worked with a lot of companies and teams, probably over 1,000, well over 1,000 teams. And there are some common things that we started to see in terms of software development organizations and their business units and how they didn't talk. And so one of my things is how do we enable the business, because I think some of it's our fault, some of it's their fault. How do we enable our business to have the right levers that don't interfere with the how we do things, but optimize for gain? And I think that's where I'm really focused on. So we build products that support that, and we also do a lot of consulting at strategic levels of companies. Now with a story to start out with about what this talk is on. So I was in a room one time, I was working with a company. They had 5 Scrum teams started up, and they had a legacy software platform. And one day we had already run a few sprints. You know, in Scrum, a sprint's a time box, and they've run a few iterations of these sprints. And about 6 weeks in, the director of development comes to me and says, "This is going really great." And she goes, "But there's one thing. What do we do with all the defects in our tracking system?" And I said, "Oh, well, how many are there?" And they go, "Well, there's 5,000 open issues inside of our ClearQuest system." And I go, "Wow, so you're going to fix 5,000 things?" And she goes, "No." Well, I go, "What do you do then?" She goes, "Well, we get all of the leads and the managers together once a month for 1 to 2, 3 days, and we triage." And I'm doing numbers in my head, right? I'm doing these big numbers in my head. These are your people, you're probably top paid folks in a room for 1 to 3 days every month. That's a lot of money. And this is something we tend not to think about in the software industry. You guys start thinking about this money thing, by the way. So I go, "Okay, well, what do you do then?" She goes, "Well, we pick out the top 20%. "Okay, so you're gonna fix 1,000 of them in the next month. That's pretty good." I thought, that's amazing. And she looked at me very funny, just like she's doing right now. And she goes, no, we're just picking up the top 20%. And I go, "Okay, well, how many can you fix in the next 3 months? Let's just start from there." And she goes, 250, about. I go, okay. And I'm already thinking there's a problem. I heard the moment. That wasn't it. She then went on to say, but we're going to add about 600 more in that same time frame. And anybody who knows math, that seems like a problem, right? Okay, we know there's a problem. In fact, it's a gushing problem. Well, I go, do you really want to hear my answer and my suggestion? And she says, yeah, that's why I asked you. I go, you're not going to like it. She goes, well, please tell me. So I go, okay, well, what I'd like for you to do, what I suggest you do, is take the top 250, get those people together less than a day, I hope. You just go get your top 250. You've probably looked at them about 15 times already. Get your top 250, go figure out how to group them or bucket them or do whatever you need to, get them into your one list of work alongside your features, prioritize them right alongside the features like you do in Scrum. One list of work, no two items have the same priority. You got to decide. From there, the other 4,750, what do you think I told her?
Forget it.
Bury them in the backyard.
Yeah, close them. If they're important, they'll come back, I promise. Now, I wasn't there the next day, but it wasn't because of that. Anyways, but that led me to think, and you know what was interesting about that moment is I empathized with her. Because I had been in that same meeting before, but I hadn't seen it from the perspective of the consultant. I had been the person who made the reasonable argument for what we were doing. And I think that that is something that I have to always understand, is that I made the same mistakes. And not only that, I didn't have another way to go at that point in time. Nobody told me there was another way. So one of the things for me is I have a no defect policy. And a lot of people, mostly probably in this group, think I'm crazy to have a no defect policy. That doesn't mean I ever reach no defects, but I get damn close. And I've been on some teams that have had some amazing capabilities, and they weren't rock star developers, they weren't rock star testers. They just worked well together. And we had a mindset that was much different than I've seen in most companies. And so my passion is, how can I help teams get that same feeling? Because whenever you've been on, I don't know how many of you have been on that kind of team where you just go, wow, this is the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. You want more of that. And I want more people to have that experience. So for me, this is kind of about that talk. What are some of the things that went into that? And not only that, that wasn't the only team. I had 3 or 4 teams that went amazing throughput in terms of productivity and quality at the same time. And not only that, I've also worked with other teams who have done the same thing. And it's not something that can't be done. It can be done in many different places. So first things first, for all those people who do the Twitter, here is information if you want to tweet. I love to hear your feedback. So whatever your feedback is, and I'm guessing I'm in a QA group, I'm bound to get feedback. So please do. I love to talk about it, and this is something I'm very passionate about. I don't want just everybody following along with me. I'd love to hear your feedback. Okay. Also, if you have good feedback, I like that too. There's some things about me, and then here's what we're doing. And we don't have much time, so I'm going to move on. Okay. That was the familiar story I just talked about. Here's where that group was. Okay. They got stuck in the mud. In fact, they could never get themselves out. What actually happened to that group as an epilogue, 2 years later, they got disbanded and outsourced. In fact, about 60 people got taken out, and a whole office shut down, or at least a floor of an office shut down. Okay. Not something I think is interesting at all for what I want in a company. But one of the things that they started not looking at was software quality attributes. They forgot. In fact, they thought it was too costly to have software quality. They thought it was too costly to take the time. They had dates, right? They had a date they had to hit, and that was it. And that rhymed, that's pretty good. Should write that down. So one of the things that I think is the number one mindset principle, and I'll have a few of these principles throughout the slides, but number one is no matter what, the cost of addressing software debt increases over time. So when we talk about software debt, it's really this thing, if we don't pay it now, it'll be a debt later that we have to pay back. And even if you don't touch software, in fact, we were just talking, I mean, do you have any systems where people don't even touch it, but because people move on or whatever else, to get somebody to go make the next change is huge, right? The cost goes up. When we think of hours, that's money. And as a business, if we don't understand that this is a debt that we're constantly going to pay for later, in a surprise manner usually, we are going to lose. We're going to slow down, we're going to cut our profit margins. And we need to understand that. So we need to understand that software debt is always going to raise the costs if we leave it. So one thing I did is when I wrote the book, there was a lot of talk about technical debt. I mean, it's still a lot of talk about technical debt out there. And I thought that was great. And in fact, I'm a coder. I still code now. So I code after I leave here. I'll probably do some coding. Okay. But one of the things I found was that's not all that software is about in software delivery. Right? And I think all of us kind of know that. There's a lot to software delivery. It has nothing to do with coding. Okay? It's what to code. Right? That's one thing we have to think about. It's how do we make sure it's testable and that we can continually test it over time and we don't break the perception of our product over time. And that it constantly has low latency as we scale up those software quality attributes, and also that it's releasable and that the cost of release is not so big that we decide not to release so often, which is a common occurrence in many companies. We just stop releasing because the cost of release is too big. So not only that, our people, this is one of the worst things that can happen. Now, I'm not going to go much into detail about this, but I do want to tell a quick story. Going into a company, talking to a coder or a tester, ask them what they're doing. I've actually had people say to me, I'm working on this requirement. I said, wow, okay, well, what does that requirement do? They go, well, when you push this button, it goes over here. I go, okay, why? Who uses that? And they go, I don't know. Okay, well, why are you doing it? They go, I don't know. It's in the spec. It's right here. Right? We've just dumbed down the whole process and actually probably ruined the product. They're probably ruining the product every day now. There's no creativity, there's no connection with the customer. And so one of the things platform experience did is really about how your people align to the actual customer. If we don't have that, then we actually have a breakdown in process. So there's some reason I didn't just call it technical debt. It's all those other things that really go into this. It's more than just the code. That's one aspect, but there are many other aspects we need to cover. So quality debt, this is the one we're going to focus on tonight, really is the break-fix mentality. I'll break it now and then somewhere down the road somebody will tell me what I need to fix. Okay, the break-fix mentality is one of the worst things that we're doing in our industry. It's not quality assurance anymore, by the way. Right? It's quality control. Quality assurance is that we would actually be up front and we would be thinking about testing. We'd be thinking about whether or not it works up front. But what we're doing is quality control. Whatever we get, can we find enough stuff wrong with it before it goes out the door and fix it? It's a wrong method. And there's the other ones that you can also go into more, and plus there's a book, so if you want to do some light reading, get some sleep, you can have something there. So one of the main things I like to do is talk about asserting quality. Now, probably in this room, there's a lot of folks go, well, quality, what is that, right? And all of us know that you can't pin that down to a number. It's a lot different than that. Quality has some really interesting aspects that you can't pin down. In fact, what I find is that what we're trying to do is to set a bar, right? Asserting quality really is setting a bar that when we say we hit that bar, we're feeling more confident that we have quality, okay? Or a sufficient quality. Not only that, you may even be able to trend numbers over time to see whether or not you're trending in the wrong direction in certain quality attributes, right? But those are going to be very specific. It's not an overall quality statement. It's different attributes of the system. But when we assert quality, one of the main things that a lot of Agile teams, and I actually have worked with other teams as well, not just your traditional Scrum or XP team, but Kanban teams and others, is defining what done means. It's a subjective quality, right? If we can just lay out not only what it takes to code this thing and check it in, but what tests should be run, exactly, which ones should be run. In fact, we were working with a pharmaceutical company, and they have FDA and HIPAA compliance, all those little fun things that you have to go through. And one of the interesting things about this company is they had an existing, what's called an SDLC, System Development Lifecycle. And in that, they had 7 quality gates. And my co-founder, Brent Barton, he actually was working very closely with this group to help them understand how Agile, when it gets brought in, still is able to attain the intent and the artifacts needed to pass those gates, phase gates. What was interesting is they were able to create this document right here, a checklist, their definition of done. And as you see, it incorporates lots of different things: test code review, tested on FE, which was an environment, functional environment. Test approves user story. All P1 to P3 bugs for the story are closed. What they would do is send this around at the end of every sprint, and every team member had to say whether or not they believed they met the definition of done for the things that they delivered that sprint. And that actually collapsed 5 quality gates into a 2-week sprint.
Huh.
It was amazing. In fact, increased productivity tremendously. Not only that, they got very creative about the way they tested and did automation and promotion and all those other things that are very interesting in our industry. One of the things that you find out quite soon, though, when you try to do these when you're a traditional organization that has more of the break-fix mentality, is that after the last feature is added, there's still a lot of stuff to do, right? In fact, we might call that release stabilization, or you might call it feature complete, or code complete sometimes, code freeze. What does that mean to all of you? Anyone, just name out, what does code complete or feature complete mean to you?
No more changes.
No more changes.
It's time to test.
Time to test, yeah. And time to file bugs?
Don't file it.
Oh, don't file any bugs. Wow, okay.
It just makes waves, definitely.
Yeah.
It should be ready for shipping
Right.
at this point.
Well,
Okay.
Right, it can be.
ready for release?
If you're doing it right, it can be, and actually, that's what I
Every
believe.
check-in goes to warranty, and it's a big deal. So bugs are a big deal.
So let's say you're in a traditional organization, what does it really mean? I know what it theoretically means, but what does it really mean?
Dev moves on to another project.
Okay, what else does it mean?
The manager yelled loud enough that you finally said, yeah, it's complete.
Mm-hmm. And then you go back to coding a little bit, right?
Everything else after that's a bug.
Yeah, I used to do that, by the way. And then as a tester, what's your first run at the build look like?
Crap.
Yeah, you don't even get through the whole thing. In fact, you log a ton of bugs, hoping that you covered all your bases and shame the development team enough that they'll do something about it, right?
It always seems to be the point at which they force in globalization and localization testing as well.
Yeah, this is where they do all the testing.
Okay,
that
now
probably
I want
matters.
you to try that in a bunch of different languages, and it should still work.
then we'll add the performance goals.
And accessibility testing.
So let's go back to the slide before. We've lost our focus on software quality attributes. We wrote some code, but it's crap. Okay, and we're not doing quality assurance anymore, we're doing quality control and ad hoc fixing. Even though we supposedly have this disciplined approach for having a code complete and feature complete date, it isn't working. And so what we do many times when we create a definition of done is create a waterline. The things above the line are the things we do actually every 2 weeks when we first start out, because when we get to feature complete of any item, there's still some stuff to do. Those are the things below the line, and those things below the line are actually items that are currently blockers to us being ready to go every time. I like to think of getting to push button release. I should be able to get acceptance from the business, and at some point, when they say go, I push a button and it's in production. Okay? And that's not only on some little wimpy system. We've worked with companies who have big monolithic systems. In fact, we have one company we work with, and they have over 1,000 servers just for their continuous integration environment. Okay? We should get to that point. Push button release. We can all do it. It's just a technical challenge. It's whether or not we decide to take it on. Now, every time I make these items below the line, I write an impediment. In fact, those are roadblocks. That's roadblocks for me having push button release. And I write down the impediment, and one of the things might be regression testing. You might say, you might use what's called the 5 whys to figure out what the impediment is. Like, why don't we do regression testing every 2 weeks? Well, it takes 4 weeks to run. Why does it take 4 weeks to run? Because we have to do it manually. Why do we do it manually? Because we've never taken enough time to automate it. Why don't we automate it? Well, because we just didn't do it. Okay? Or you hear something like, we don't have enough resources. I like to call them people, but we don't have enough of them. Well, probably not. You're probably just trying to do too many things at once. Why don't we take the time and do it? What are you doing with that 6-week period at the end? Not delivering any features, you're just making sure everything's not broken. Or at least the most important things, and triaging out. What's even worse is having that conversation during the triage meeting. Is that really a Sev 1 bug? Or is it Sev 3? Because if it's a Sev 3, we can go out the door with it. I don't know if you've ever had that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. That really sucks.
Is there a good name for that? Like deflation or?
Rationalization, I think.
If you guys come up with a good name, we should write it down and write an article.
That's called lying.
Yeah.
Sophie's choice.
It's called madness. So here's a case study of actually test automation reducing the cost of test. And here's the reason why I want to reduce the cost of test. I mean, just philosophically. Many times what we do in testing is we push buttons a lot. In fact, we push the same buttons in the same order multiple times. Test scripts. We run them over and over and over again. Computers are really good at that. And we're not making use of our testers and what they do well and what they bring to the table. I want a tester who's more exploratory. I want them to think about what might the user do here, rather than what button do I push again? What does it say on my script? That's a ridiculous way to use testing. So one of the things as a philosophy is figure out how do we reduce the cost of the test execution and focus more on what test strategy is. An effective test strategy, not just pushing buttons. So here was a company, a team within a company, and they had 75 person hours for two full test runs manually on a like-to-like migration. So they were taking data from one place that was an old platform and moving it to a new platform because they were going to lapse their support contract at the end of the year. And they had comprehensive manual regression testing and then data validation and verification at the end. They would do 2 full runs, and that was costing them $17,000 of time, of people's time, during that sprint. Okay? We decided to work on an automation strategy, and there was a couple of folks who are very integral to this, but the whole team got involved. And they created a definition done that included automated testing. In fact, automated acceptance testing is what it tends to be called in the Agile community. And what they use is a tool called FIT. And you can go out, it's an open source tool. You can write tests in Word. What's really cool is you can decorate it with documentation as well, and they execute directly against the system through tables. Okay. Very cool tool, easy to use, and also nice to read. So one of the cool things was after 8 iterations and that healthy bit of automated testing going on, they reduced the 70+ hours to 6 hours. And they went from $17,000 per sprint to $7,000. Now they had that $10,000 worth of time to do something more effective. And they did. And in fact, the same team got 4x throughput in delivery.
Well, that assumes the automation works. I mean, it's been my
Yes.
experience in my last job, they automated everything. And I spent more time maintaining the automated test cases than I did doing any actual work. So if this stuff, if a test case fails, then you gotta go fix it, and it takes more time and effort to fix it than it would be to run the stupid test audit manually in the first place.
That's true. And that actually is something that I think is important to think about test strategy and why your test strategy is so important. Because if you're doing what are called record and playback tests and automating that way, it's one of the most brittle ways to run tests. Somebody moves a little button,
Yeah,
it breaks all your tests.
Yep.
Well, that's not a good testing system. Okay? And in fact, in this case, they didn't test through the UI. What they did is they test right underneath the UI. In fact, they acted like they were the UI. So I don't really care where you move the buttons around. That's a different type of testing. What they did is they made sure that right underneath the UI, through the APIs, that they were able to run these tests over and over again with different data sets and make sure that it worked. And that was a much less brittle system. And then they had what are called test fixtures that encapsulated ways to execute against the system. A very thin veneer in between the test that executes and the actual system. These things can be reused over and over and over again without having to write some more code.
Okay.
And so, yes, the test strategy, in fact, and this is what this is. The Agile Regression Testing Triangle. It's a modification of something Mike Cohn, who's well known in the Agile community, put out. And I did some variation on it. The first one is most of your tests, your actual automated tests, should be unit tests. If you want to have the least brittle tests, they're at the smallest micro level. What a unit test is, or what it is not actually, I think that's a better way to define it. A unit test does not touch databases, does not touch networks, does not touch the file system, has no special configurations to run them. They are unit tests. And if you want to read a great book on that, mostly if you have legacy software, a great book is Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. It might be one of the best books on the market in the technology realm ever. And in fact, on Amazon, it still gets 5 stars with well over 40 reviews. And that's amazing on Amazon. There's only a few people that pull it down. That one's got great reviews. I think it's an amazing book. And in there, he talks about the definition of unit test. Now, one of the things a lot of folks get into is they use like JUnit or NUnit or one of these things, and then they write a bunch of integration tests. Those are brittle as well, right? In fact, you change the design of your database, all of a sudden all your tests break. Okay, that wouldn't be a good way to go either. So testing strategy is huge here. It's a unit test, very well defined, only in the logic, not at the perimeters of your app. Now, when you get to the perimeters of your app, you still need to test those, right? Your implementations of integrations, or maybe you're putting a veneer on top of XML with SOAP services on top. Well, now we need to do some integration testing because you want to test that your integration is going well. In that case, you want some automated and some exploratory. There's some need to think more about these because they have more options around them, right? How pieces fit together. And so automated a lot, but really I like to keep the automation just to enough to feel confident, okay? I really want my unit tests to do most of the hard lifting and this to do a little bit of lifting. And then at the top, these are your smoke plus tests. Just enough at the UI level that it's a smoke test, but then just a little bit more. Maybe that really big account that you have a little bit of extra risk aversion with them, so you do a little bit more depth in testing in automation. And also at this level, if you're talking about a web application, you're using something like Selenium, we do not write these tests after the fact or record them after the fact, after the UI is created. I like to have the development team, the whole team, and when I say that, I mean testers, because we all develop software. The whole team is there saying, okay, what's that button going to be named? Let's give it an ID, because in a web page, every element can have an ID, by the way. It's HTML compliant. If it has an ID, I can find it no matter where you move it. And the only problem I have is if you totally change the pages all around, then we should be talking anyways at that point. Okay? So one of these things that we need to do is figure out how to make things testable. Not only that, do encapsulation of tests. So rather than making one big long test script that is very brittle and you have to find the one place that it broke now, you make small, tiny test components that you fit together to make big tests. Right? So log in as Steve the admin, that's one little test component. And you can reuse that over and over again as Steve the admin that logs in. And then go to the order page. Okay, we can reuse that over and over again. And then here's where I test the information on the page. But if I do that, what's really nice is I can actually do it, and then I put my test code with the real code. And I like to say real code, I really hate that term, by the way. All the code is there. Every artifact that has to do with the software is in one place. I can do a diff in source control and see what changed from a date maybe 2 weeks ago till now, and verify that the right things have been changed or not changed in small increments rather than that big thing after 6 months of work. Okay. So this is kind of very important. I think you brought up the big problem is you could go automate like crazy and automate in a crappy way. Have to deal with it later. Got to think about your test strategy more holistically.
Yeah, I have taken to not even calling record playback automation.
Well, it wasn't record playback,
No,
but it was still UI testing.
Yeah.
And you're right. I hated coming in the morning and looking at the overnight runs because I knew what I had to do all day.
Yeah, and when they're the most prevalent of all your tests, it's even worse. Right, so even when you do good testing at the functional level, make it a little bit. Make it the least amount as possible, drive the testing down to the micro level as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing that's very helpful, and we talked about, well, what if we move all the pages around? That's a design discussion. And one of the things that I think is interesting, by the way, I used to run a software architecture group. I'm, been an enterprise architect, whatever you want to call those people. And one of the things that I found is that testability is one of the best ways to architect systems. It actually drives high cohesion and low coupling, okay, for the most part, with some smarts of it as well. But given that, one of the great things is getting testers into the design process rather than being at the end of the hill. In fact, there's this little term you hear in waterfall many times, is stuff rolls downhill, where stuff is a different word. Okay? And you guys are at the end, right? Anybody who's doing testing. You just get this, whatever comes at you, okay, now I gotta test it. What was the requirements again? Let me make sure I verify that. That is a terrible way to test. In fact, you probably should have been up at the front saying, well, that's not a very testable design, and it doesn't quite work for the user. You might have some of the best analytical skills on the user's behalf. Why aren't you in the design session? So what we have here is the three amigos. In fact, I want to give a shout out to George Dinwiddie and Bob Payne, who really kind of got this going, although they don't talk about it as much as I would hope. I think it's a great pattern called the Three Amigos pattern. And one of the things that we do is when we first get a new requirement, maybe a user story, if you're in an Agile team that's using user stories, what you do is you actually have some information that you've worked out with your product owner, the person on the other side who's clarifying the requirements. And once you've clarified that, you need to go and get more detail, because we might get some acceptance criteria. This is kind of how you would demo it to them at the end of the sprint, but it doesn't detail out quality work. Okay, we need more test plan. So one of the things that you do as the Three Amigos, you get at least a tester, at least somebody who's an analyst, and at least somebody who's a coder into the same room for 30 minutes to an hour, and you go into detail. What are all the different tests, and what's the design look like for this small piece that we're going to build? And how does it work with all the other things we're doing? Get those three folks in the room. You might also bring a fourth or fifth amigo as well if it's needed. And through that, you're able to drive out some information that puts out negative test conditions, boundary conditions, all those other things we know is important for any feature to work. Load and stress, right, changes. And so those are the things I start to think about. And these three amigos come out with that list, and now what's cool about it is the coder knows, here's the list of tests I need to pass before it ever gets into a test environment. Not only that, a QA person can actually go and sit with them during the process of implementing and verify small chunks before it gets into a test environment. This is something that's really cool. Once you get testers verifying before it gets to the end, and where you become a team member and a helper and supporter of the code, rather than somebody who's at the end who tells me all the bad things I just did. Okay? Never felt like that before, I'm sure, right? All right.
Would
Yes.
you say the analysis person that you're talking about in this is the PM?
Yeah, product owner is many times that person, but it also might be
They
that
represent the
subject.
customer, so they're usually that role.
Yeah, and sometimes the product owner isn't the right person though. It might be a subject matter expert they have to bring in for that particular item. The product owner might be coordinating that and ensuring that it's right, but yeah, I want to make sure it's that person who can clarify. So at minimum, include those folks, the three amigos, and there may be more that you need to bring in, like an architect security, for instance. You might want to bring in a security architect, just to help out where needed. Should only take 30 minutes to an hour, and you're focusing on clarification and design. That's where you're focusing. Everybody leaves the room with the same information, and of course there will be changes probably as you get to the details, but you have a platform to talk now. And most of the issues don't come in terms of how well you coded or how well you tested. Most of them come in communication. And have you ever interpreted a design document wrong or a requirements doc?
Yeah.
Or the customer, when they say to you, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
That's true, it did. Another thing that this leads to, though, is a cycle that's very interesting called acceptance test-driven development. Rather than to drive towards some UAT at the end, what would be interesting is if you can get earlier feedback in the process when you can actually respond to it. Does the UAT at the end where you get a whole bunch of feedback but nothing changes because of it? Almost isn't feedback, right?
Isn't that called beta customers? Pretty much.
Yeah, it's a beta customer. Well, hopefully your beta customers also have an effect as well, but many times they don't. What we're just doing is don't break anything, but is there anything that you find wrong with it that we have to fix now? Well, I don't want that. I want to create the product that they actually want to use. I want them to be excited about using my product, my software. And if that's the case, then we need to be able to have a cycle that allows for that feedback early and often. And so one of the things we do is we do the three amigos that draft some acceptance test cases, and then we implement based upon those list of tests and designs, and then we execute them. And in fact, Fit was a good example of this, using Fit to actually drive these tests. And a lot of unit tests were underneath that as well. It wasn't just the Fit tests underneath that, the micro level, the component level. They were writing lots of unit tests to make sure the behavior was consistent there as well, and could be regressed. And now we review the results, and sometimes the customer says, hey, that wasn't quite what I wanted, green, not blue. Great. Let's draft that test case. We're close now. Run through the cycle one more time. Does this look good now? Okay, let's move on. We're done. And we've done a quality job. So start from acceptance, at least a view of it, and drive towards that. And then get feedback on that acceptance criteria. So here's the next step, though, releases. Okay, the break-fix mentality tends to lead to longer and longer release cycles, or what we call release stabilization. Working with a company not too long ago, maybe a few years ago, and they were up to the point where they had 12 weeks for release, but 6 of it was just fixing things and stabilizing the product. The 2 up front were just planning. So if you think about that, they only had 4 weeks of actual delivering features. That seems ridiculous. And not only that, they never delivered as much as the customer wanted. So even worse. And they thought the next release, they were probably going to go down to 2 weeks of delivery. And that came on all of a sudden. It doesn't happen overnight. In terms of the first time, it builds up, and then all of a sudden, wow, we can't even do 4 weeks worth of work. Now we're doing 2. So if releases are like giving birth, then we're doing something wrong. I don't know what giving birth is like, but I was there one time when it was happening, a couple times actually, and it didn't look good. All right, I empathize maybe, but I have no idea what it just looked like. I didn't want to be in the other seat. Okay, and one thing that's interesting is that when we think about push button release, what we're really talking about is this should be simple. There's no reason why we can't automate most deployments. There's no reason. I've seen some very horizontally scalable multi-data center deployments and phased out rollouts, automated entirely. 750 servers, IMVU, you can go out and read about it. They do it all the time. In fact, they'll put it out to only one region and then decide if they broke something. They'll know within a few minutes because they have so many users that give them feedback on Twitter. Okay? These are the things that we need to be able to do as an industry. Releases should not be like giving birth. We should be able to do them anytime. In fact, the guy Robert Benefield here, he was working at Yahoo, and what was interesting at the time, this is many years ago, we were having dinner when he said this, and he used to be able to bring up 1,000, 2,000 servers at a time. Push a button. In an operational capacity. So here's a case study. So this is a company, about 180 folks. They're Web 2.0. They had their existing SDLC. The problem was, and why I was there, was because they had 6-month release cycles and they were in a Web 2.0 space. That was just way too long. They had no feedback. They were not able to meet the demands of their market. So one of the first goals that we had was to get them down to 1-month releases. Okay? And they had 15 Scrum teams. So this is, Scrum team is about 8 people in this case, on average for this company. And they had 15 of them in India and in other places in the US. Okay? Now, we changed their whole release management strategy and the way that they used their servers in their environments. And they did this, not me. But we gave them some principles and worked with them very closely. And what was really cool, what they came out with is within 3 months, we went from 6-month release cycles down to 1 week. Every week they deployed to production with confidence. In fact, one of the first things that we did was turn back on their unit tests. They had been turned off because they kept breaking those damn things. Okay? So these are some of the things that we started doing. We also plastered up on the wall code coverage. It was at like 5%. And we had a thermometer, and we said, every time it gets a little better, let's put it up there. And we celebrated when it got up a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. Not in the wrong way by just throwing something out on the front end, but code coverage in the internals of the system at the unit test level. Okay? And what was also very interesting is they were able to start experimenting with their customers, and in fact, over time, even change their business model because of this. Fast enough that they can meet new market demands and change their market position. Okay, so it was a business reason to do this. They also went, in terms of cycle time for an idea to implementation, went way down. It went from about 2 years down to a couple of months. So they have an idea, and within a couple of months it's in production. This was huge for them. But it took a lot of work. And it took all the coordination of these groups and a different strategy around testing and around release. And one of the most powerful tools is the power of 2 scripts, deploy and rollback. And we practice them every day, hopefully multiple times a day. We deploy, rollback, deploy, rollback, deploy, rollback. In fact, when we get to production deployment, it's a no-brainer. We already know it works. We're very confident that it's going to work, because we've done it so many times already. Okay? This is something that I think is very important. And deploy and rollback have a lot underneath them, and a lot needs to be built. But as test and quality assurance, we need to be able to have this competency to be able to deploy and roll back, because that's the only way you get real feedback about real deployments. And we need to test deployments, not just the functional aspects of software. Another thing that this company started doing is got away from a lot of branching. Branching is one of the banes of our existence in software. And I know there's folks out here tell me, well, we have to branch and there's good reason to branch. Yeah, that's great. But you shouldn't branch for no reason. In fact, you have to have a really damn good reason. So most of the time when we're talking about branching strategies and source control, and I know some of you don't deal with source control, but I think the test should live with the code. Because when they don't match up. Okay? They have to run with the code. So I know Quality Center and a lot of these other tools, I'll tell you my opinion is I don't put them there unless you just have them hooked up to your source control and automating that process to fill out your Quality Center.
You don't put them in Quality Center in this example? Oh.
No, I don't. I put them with the code. Okay? And there are a lot of great tools out there to make that effective. But I won't go down that path. If you want to talk about it later, I'd love to talk about that. But source control is a very important aspect. A lot of times what we do is we get to version 1 and we automatically branch it off because we know there's going to be bugs. We have gotten in this industry this idea that we have to deliver bugs. In fact, we love to catalog them, in fact. Right? We have huge long lists. We have bug databases that have been built to have amazing capabilities to capture data about our bugs. In fact, I used to run a session with a friend of mine, Michael Quardev, called Cataloging Our Inadequacies. Bugs do not exist. Okay? Whenever we start cataloging, we start to get this small incremental step towards more and more defects captured. And then you turn into that group I started out talking about where we have 5,000 items, issues tracked in some database somewhere. And then we triage a lot. It's costly. It's a cost that we don't see on the books. Okay. Now, then we go off and run in 2 branches at least, and then you at some point in time need to merge it all together and make sure it works. And this is where a lot of bad decisions are made. Usually there's a death march where the nights and weekends program starts to kick in. Everybody stick around to make this thing get out the door on time. And there's this debt that starts to accrue because we're making poor decisions on quality attributes. We're getting it to work, get it to work, get it to work, get it to work. And we're causing more and more problems. In fact, you ever have a bug that you put into a database and then the coder goes and, like me, I go off and I go and implement something and I say it's fixed, and then it comes back and there's 3 new bugs right behind that one. Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. So I actually was talking to a VP of an operations group at a health management systems company. And he says to me, he goes, it was after a certified Scrum Master class, he got the end, this is great, it looks like this is what I think we should do. Now here's my problem. And he started to draw on a wall a branching strategy that I couldn't even comprehend. It branch upon branch and it merges and branch and then merge. And I go, how's that work out for you? And he goes, it's not. Okay? And then he goes, how do you do this in Agile? And I go, you sure this is a theme, by the way, you sure you want to hear my answer? And I said, and he said, yeah, I really do. And I go, you're not going to like it. Okay? And I go, well, first you have version 1. And what do you think comes next?
Version 2.
Version 2. A roll forward strategy. Okay? The only way we can do this is by having shorter cycles and by having more discipline in our quality. Okay? And in fact, I told them, you shouldn't do this tomorrow. You should not do this because you can't. You don't have the proper infrastructure to make this happen. You need other tools. You need continuous integration. And you need to get more sophisticated with your integration strategy. And you need to integrate early and often. In fact, continuous integration means at least 2 things philosophically. 1, everybody checks into the same place, the same branch. And 2, everyone checks in every day. This is a big change for a lot of traditional organizations who code. where they hold on their code for a long period of time because they want to make it just right. And then they finally check it in. Well, we actually work in a way where sometimes on the teams I work on, we'll check in 50 times a day. And we'll run the continuous integration environment, we'll run my code through the tests 50 times. Just for the times I check in. My other team members check in as well, it's run 100 times. Okay? And we're constantly integrating. That's what continuous integration is all about. In fact, there's an idea here, a principle. Lower the threshold of pain. If it's painful, do it more often. Because then you take those small little pains and they don't add up to the big gigantic behemoth pain that you can't deal with. Okay? So you want component validation, you want that integrated validation, and you also want load and stress. And I like to have this all automated in an environment that just automatically promotes. In fact, automated promotion between environments, deploy and roll back, right? I can deploy anywhere and roll back anywhere. I automate that whole process, okay, all the way up the chain. So here's some advanced quality assertion tools, right? Continuous integration servers, they're great to help manage the process of continuous integration. Because remember, continuous integration isn't the server. Continuous integration is working on mainline and checking in every day. This tool helps us to manage our integrations effectively and keep track of them over time. And so continuous integration server can tell you early warning signs when we're having problems, like our builds keep breaking. Well, rather than stopping the builds so often because they keep breaking, I keep getting yelled at, instead of that, why don't we fix them so that they never break, or that they break less often at least. So one of the things that when we talk about lower the threshold of pain, that also goes after the fact. Don't subside the pain with a Band-Aid. Fix it. And don't wait around to fix it. So continuous integration. Also, quality attributes can go beyond just the definition of done. You can go to actually managing some metrics around your code just to find trends and some weak signals in there of when you're introducing debt. Technical debt, this tends to be. For instance, code coverage. When your code coverage starts going down, that's probably a bad thing. Okay? If your test success is going in the wrong direction, that's probably a bad thing as well, right? Your test should run every time the same way. Right? And if you're having this breakage all the time, that's a big problem. We need to fix that. And then duplication, one of the worst design problems in software. Copy-paste programming, okay? This is something that we need to fix. If our duplication is getting too high, why is that? What's cool about tools like Sonar that I'm showing up here, it's free and open source, by the way. It works on .NET, Java, PHP, lots of cool tools out there. Groovy if you're using that or whatever. What's cool about this is you can click in, these are all links. Everything here is a link. You can click in and find out what your biggest culprits are in the code. You can find out which tests are not passing all the time. You can click through to find out what your culprits are, and now it's really quick spelunking through the artifacts. Okay? So Sonar is one of those tools I think is mission critical for a lot of organizations as you get sophisticated about your integration. And then there's even cooler dashboards once you get real software quality attributes focus. This is some, this is the hardcore stuff. Okay? This is Sonar porn. Okay? And then even more. Now I have all these components. In fact, you can go up here to nemo.sonarsource.org. You can see over 8 million lines of code getting run through their processes on a daily basis. Okay? Very cool stuff. Even rating them with ABC and all that. It's kind of cool. You'll know where your legacy is. All right, lots of dashboards. I like to have those up there, mostly not necessarily to get to a number, but to watch trends. I want to see if we're going in the wrong direction. And then, here are early warning signs that we're having problems on this team. I need to go fix this. We have to make some investment here. Then I go into Sonar. I'm looking at complexity as well. In fact, back in the 70s, McCabe showed that cyclomatic complexity is the best way to create, low cyclomatic complexity is the best way to create maintainable code. The least amount of paths through a function is the way to make it maintainable. It was proven a long time ago. We've known this for a long time. We should keep that down. In fact, on Java projects, I try to keep method below 5 and class below 20. And when I have those classes that creep up, in fact, I click through on these and look for my biggest culprits. Let's see if we have to have a refactoring session. So I'm getting close to the end, but I want to focus on that no defect mindset that I talked about earlier. And we don't need a way to borrow more because we constantly do that all the time. And we pay for it later. So Ken Schwaber, he was one of the co-creators of Scrum, the Scrum framework. And he had this great saying in a talk he gave on the canary in the coal mine. For every dollar of competitive advantage gained by cutting quality, it costs $4 to restore it. That's about on average. Once you put something in production that's a defect, it costs a lot more to fix it. Okay? And software is an organizational asset, and decisions to cut quality must be made by executive management and reflected in the financial statements. When you cut quality, it should be reflected in the financials. There are sometimes reasons to do that. I own a company, a startup, and I know when I've done that. I have to say I've made that poor decision in this manner way more times than I made a good decision of. So whenever I think about cutting quality, I think twice now. And I own this business. I have to deal with this asset. I have to sell it to customers. I have to maintain it every day. These are things that I have to think about. And my money is behind it. Nobody else is putting up their money. Okay? It's a business decision. So I don't do it anymore. It's better for me to actually continually focusing on quality than it is to try to cut the corner for a couple of minutes savings. Okay. And here's a case study. So we were working on this project. So this application was a field support application, went from customer service all the way to field support. 2,000 plus, really around 3,000 people used it every single day. And there was multiple perspectives all over the place on this. We inherited the code base because the previous developer group, they actually were slowing down tremendously, and the customer, after 5 years of working with them, said, I've had enough. We need somebody else to get faster on this thing. So, because it was critical to their operations. So they brought us in, and we had a team of 5 people. It was a cold fusion on top of Oracle stored procedures. Okay, and anybody's a coder in here cringing and ugliness, right? Okay. So nothing against cold fusion, but it sucks. Okay? So one thing also is you can't find people who know cold fusion. So they cost a lot of money when you get them. And that isn't reasonable either. And they're hard to find and they cost a lot of money. That's a bad problem. So we started also with a re-architecture of the platform while we were changing it and keeping it up and running. We deployed to production 33 times out of 33 sprints, or 36 sprints. Okay? Every 2 weeks, we deployed to production. And in those 33 deployments, we only had 1 defect. So let me tell you about the defect, because I remember the day. Okay? We were pairing. In fact, 2 of my good friends and people I still talk to this day, because we had that team where you just can't forget those team members. And when we were working together, they were pairing over on another station. They turn around and say, Chris, hey, we've got this button where when you click it, a comma-separated value file pops out of the application, and we don't have a test fixture to test this. And it seems like it's too costly to actually build a test fixture for this, an automated one. Maybe we shouldn't test it. Maybe we shouldn't write a fixture for it. It's easy anyways. It's just an easy feature change. Okay? And I go, well, we're test driven. In fact, we used to write our tests first. We would even write them from the outside first. And we write automated tests that failed before we'd implement the code underneath to make them work. And I said, we're test driven. They go, well, it's just too costly. It's not valuable enough to do. And I thought to myself, okay, either it's going to work, which would be great, or we'll learn something. Okay? We had just had about 10 sprints where we hadn't had a defect, by the way. 10 sprints, no defects at all. 3,000 people using it every day. And I remember we got to the end of the sprint, everything worked. In fact, product owner, system analyst, the business analyst, they all touched and played with it, and they said, okay, it's great, ship it. Push the button, they went to production. They even let us push the button, even though we were the vendor, they would let us push the button. So we pushed the button, it went in production, voila. So we go on to do our next planning, we're starting our next sprint. About a week into the sprint, we get this defect report from the project manager. And in the report, it says the comma separated value file that pops out is missing a title on one of the columns, and therefore everything shifted over one. We have a workaround because we just shift the titles over and put the new title in, but could you fix it in the next sprint? The team was devastated. The team was devastated. We were like, how could we possibly let that through? That sucks. By the way, we created a test fixture right away, and then we fixed the problem. Okay? That's the team I want. The team I want is the one that doesn't allow, and in fact is devastated whenever that problem happens. They did not have a mindset that we build bugs into the software. They have a no defect policy, and of course we never make it all the way there, but man, there's no way that I'm letting a defect out the door because I'm doing quality work. Not only that, this team went 10x throughput. We could actually show it. We could show that they went from 13 points of delivery to 162. Okay, more than 10x. That's because they focused on quality, not because it was costly. So my question is, how could we not focus on quality? It's what we have to do, and if we're a profession, if we actually are doing our jobs, and we're having fun, by the way, because we had a hell of a lot of fun on that team, we will actually do this. We will build quality in from the start. Okay. So there's my slide with the can we afford not to do that? All right. Quality makes you go faster, not slower, when done right. Okay, thank you. And hopefully we have some time for just talking. Okay. So, any comments or thoughts, questions?
Oh, so I have a question, but let me just say something before I get to the question part because it's kind of confusing. So I worked at Microsoft for 14 years. In the last 8 years, we're an Exchange server. And first I want to tell you about the interesting thing about the bugs, leaving the bugs in the product. So at one point at Microsoft, they wrote a tool that went through the RAID bug database. And every bug that was closed as won't fix or postponed, it generated an automatic KB article for. And then these KB articles will ship off by the hundreds to the support engineers who own that product, right? So your product may generate 2,000 KB articles. And all those support engineers spent like 2 months going through each one, trying to repro it, see if it was still there, and then take this bug report and turn it into a published KB article online for customers so that if they ran into it, they would look it up and then see, oh, this is not going to be fixed.
So product support pays back your debt.
Yes. So in essence, they turned product support into testers because not only did they get these KB articles, which they were always responsible for publishing, but they were bugs that no one knew if they were in the product anymore, right? So
well, then look at the customer point of view. As a customer of Exchange, if I run that bug and then I look it up and all of a sudden I see, oh, they're not going to fix it.
Oh, but they don't care. They just don't want you to call in. That's the whole reason. Because you got the white paper that says this is not going to be fixed at the bottom. You're not going to call product support, right? So you're not going to
I'm thinking about making a free site with Twilio, if anybody knows what that is right now, now that you've said that, and just calling support
It was
lines.
amazing. That was one of the most mind-boggling things that happened when I was there.
Yeah.
But let me just quickly
Yeah.
say what it was
Wow.
like when Scrum hit my team. So this was about 6 years ago-ish, something like that. It was the hottest, latest thing, extreme programming and Agile and Scrum. And like other teams started adopting it, so like our teams were like, yeah, these other teams are adopting it, so they see good things about it. And what I saw was that so having gone back to Wikipedia and read about it in great depth later, I saw that it was very haphazard application of the concepts behind it. So it was kind of like, let's borrow this, this part sounds good, let's borrow this part.
It's easy.
The main things that my team did was, so the manager comes and says, we're going to adopt Scrum. Everyone's like, what does that mean? What are we doing? Well, so the first thing is we're going to have a meeting every day at 11 o'clock. A very quick meeting. We're going to call it a stand-up meeting. And everybody's going to talk about what they're working on. So that works pretty good. You know, basically you didn't have to wait to your once a week team meeting to like find out if somebody's blocked by something that maybe you could help them with or whatever. So I like that part. The other thing was the unit test cases. So at that point, the devs were not writing test cases at all. None. Like code coverage was the tester's job, and our code coverage, you know, targets that we were trying to hit were like high. Like so, we were writing all this white box testing.
BPTs.
Oh yeah, and you know, the metric reporting would come out, and you'd be like, "Oh, my code coverage is only 62%. Everyone else is up to 80." So you write some more tests. Well, when the developers got this, and they were like, "So we have to write test cases now." What you saw was this, instead of like, it was this vast migration of, whereas before you would see testers all the time sitting in devs' offices, like with the dev looking at the screen, because they're connected to a remote computer, and he's showing them how the test case is breaking, and the dev's like, oh yeah, it is, oh no, what's doing that? And like, suddenly you saw the devs in the testers' offices instead of the testers in the devs' office going like, you know, my unit tests, the test harnesses keeps breaking them, then none of them are passing, and like, you know, I gotta make mailboxes and users and like, you know, and like this code injection tool, it just gives me these weird errors every time I try it. And so it was this vast shift of seeing, and like the testers were like, woo, you know, all these unit tests that I have to write. You know, I just like in my test plan, that whole black box section, I just put a big X through that, and we have to. And the devs were like pulling out their hair because like they had their feature deliverables, and they had no idea how to write tests because they hadn't done it before, and they were blasted by that. I mean, it slowly began to improve, but at the beginning it was devastating for the devs. Yeah. And then the third thing that I saw was, so the other thing we adopted was the testers were told, so now we're going to start writing our test plan at the same time the dev is writing their dev spec. So you write your test spec as the dev is writing their dev spec. And not only that, but this means that your automation code is being written at the same time the dev is writing their feature code. So you're like, so what is my code working against? And they're like, well, placeholders, basically, because that'll be checked in a couple of weeks. Just write around it, you know, like you're going to write the thing that your test is going to do, but really the thing that it's doing with, that won't be in for like 3 or 4 weeks. So just write the parts that you can of your test cases. So that was the other thing that was really difficult was with the Scrum process was trying to do both the feature creation and the test automation creation at the same time when you couldn't run your tests to see if they worked. I mean, they would work because, well, there was nothing that they were actually toggling.
Let me ask you something though. Could you have set up an environment where they could have ran from day one?
Well, so we attempted to do that with by doing a bunch of blanks, right? So like.
Well, no, I mean really run. So one of the things that, by the way, that's not a Scrum team.
Yes, like I said, they borrowed.
Yeah, so they borrowed some practices. So I'll let you know, a Scrum framework is really simple, by the way, but it's hella hard to implement, okay? And the reason is because it's based on complex adaptive systems. It creates boundaries that are uncomfortable for many teams. And in fact, one of the big boundaries that gets put in place is that nobody on the team, no one person is the only owner of quality. And no one's the only owner of delivery. The whole team either succeeds or fails. And you succeed or fail as a team. So if you code it and you don't test it, everybody failed. Okay? Now in that, one of the big things you got to figure out is how do you get closer and spiral together rather than doing some kind of code complete in the middle of the sprint where we start the testing, which is more of what we call Scrummerfall. And it's a Scrummer, it's pretty much waterfall, but now every 2 weeks. Okay? And then we don't ever finish testing because, of course, you know, we have all these problems.
Sure.
Because we can't figure out how many bugs we're going to have beforehand. So rather than that, what we do is we work on one item at a time. So you try to get as many people on the first item with the tasks associated to that item working at the same time. So database, testing, coding, service layer, coding, the presentation layer, all those folks, 4 people, all at least, maybe the whole team, working on one item at a time. And they have to feedback cycle amongst each other as quick as possible to get that done. In fact, I like to challenge Scrum teams. The first sprint. Okay, now you did your sprint planning, you all agree that you can probably get this done in 2 weeks. What are you gonna show me in 3 days? Okay, done. I mean done. To your definition of done. What are you gonna show me? Because what that's right there, you get the him and oh, we can't do and what you can't do it. And tell some engineers that they can't do something. Oh, no, we can do that, of course we can. And they start to think about how they could possibly do that. And all of a sudden you get a change in how you approach the work. Of course, the first sprint sucks, by the way. Anybody who starts Scrum for the first time, the first sprint's gonna suck, okay? But if you work with your management, and usually whenever I work with teams, I'll work with their management first and say, look, it's gonna suck. And in fact, it's gonna take about 3 to 4 sprints before we get to a point of just feeling comfortable again. And I say the team is gonna need your help and support and removing impediments and helping them to understand that it's okay that it sucked. Okay? And that we're doing it for a reason, because we're doing it well, we're finding out all the problems so we can start fixing them. So one of the things a lot of people, when they first do Scrum, is they focus on following the process. So we'll take the daily Scrum, we'll do some planning at the start. We won't do any documentation anymore, because it doesn't say that in Scrum. You don't, right? And of course, that's a great thing to do. I'm being very sarcastic right now. No, Agile doesn't mean you don't do documentation, by the way, okay? You should do it if you need it, right? You do a demo at the end, right, and everybody feels bad that they didn't make the coolest demo possible and they didn't test it all the way, so they feel bad. And then they have some well, they don't even do the retrospective because that seems too fluffy and ugly, and we don't really want to improve at all. We don't want to talk about the problems. And I said, there's a test problem, then there's a code problem, but we never shall talk to each other. Well, what you really focus on in Scrum, it's not built on that. Scrum is built on the idea of inspect and adapt. In fact, it's an empirical process control, not a defined process where you're just doing planning and done. You're trying to plan ahead of time. Actually, the focus is on learning. So you should try to learn as fast as possible. And there are 3 formal inspect and adapt points in Scrum. The first is daily Scrum. And that's for the sake of the team. In fact, the team has a daily Scrum, and it's their meeting. It's not for management, it's not for Scrum Masters, it's for the team to say, because I have 4 people working on one item, hey, did I impact you yesterday? Did you impact me? What does that mean to us? Is our plan still good, or does it suck now? Okay, what are we gonna do about that? That's what this daily Scrum is about.
For sure.
And that's 15 minutes or less, right? That's your first inspect and adapt point. The second one is your demo. That's where you bring your customers in. The product owner shouldn't be surprised at that point what they're getting. They should be, yeah, there you go. This is one of the main things you need to get good at, though. Bring those customers in, the stakeholders, whoever would care about the thing you just delivered, and get their feedback. In fact, it's not a celebration time to go, hey, we did something great. No, it's actually a time to go, hey, what do you think? And every time, and you testers know, we sit down and we'll watch them and get our notebook out. No matter how well you thought you did, I mean, I do this all the time on Skype. I'll get a customer who I trust, and I'll watch them on Skype. Oh my God, what did I do there? Holy crap. Not only that, my mindset is there's no such thing as user error. There is no such thing. In fact, by the way, there is no such thing as user error. My mindset is that if I didn't do it right, it's because I didn't do it right. And if they can't do something, it's because I didn't do it right. We got to figure out how to solve that. So I have a list of stuff. I thought I did a great job, but then I find, oh, crap, damn it, I found all these other things I need to do. That's what the demo is all about. Capture that data, and then it affects and then adapts your product backlog, which is that list of work. We're learning, and we're going to change that product backlog ordering based on what we learned and what its contents are. And then the third one is a retrospective. And the retrospective is where the team talks about their process. And they say, hey, this test code thing isn't quite working. What should we try in order to fix this? And we do it every sprint. In fact, every sprint should be a little different than the last one in terms of your process. And you're trying out these experiments to see if you can make improvements. It's a continuous improvement plan. Every sprint should look a little different than the last one. If you want to really do Scrum, those are the 3 things you get good at. Daily Scrums, demos, and the retrospective. Those are the three things that are most important. The other things get taken care of. But you need to learn how to inspect and adapt effectively. We know how to write down tasks. That's a planning meeting.
So let me ask you my question. That was just amusing. So a lot of Scrum seems to be designed towards prior embraced means of delivering software products to customers. And there is a definite fundamental change that's happening in the world right now in the way that software is being delivered to people. So how Scrum being based, with the push button deployment and all your concepts of there being these shorter, quicker milestones, but with more close interaction, how is that going to change with software as a service and cloud computing?
Actually, I think it's enabled it. And in fact, if you want to get into this a lot further, Lean Startup is probably a topic you want to get involved with. In fact, I highly recommend whoever's in this group, start getting some folks that are talking about Lean Startup at this group. Lean Startup is a method that goes beyond Scrum. In fact, one of the leaders of this movement, Eric Ries, wrote the book, The Lean Startup. And in there, they actually used at IMVU, they used Scrum, but they went beyond that to what's called continuous deployment. In fact, they would deploy 50 times a day. Okay? And there were at least three folks involved in that, including marketing, testers, and coders, that would decide, yes, deploy.
It kind of feels like every customer is always now a beta customer and you never really do beta.
Well, the interesting thing is if you start to build integrity in and you're deploying all the time and you have deploy and rollback, well, they didn't even have rollback, they had roll forward because they were working on such small pieces. Once you get to that point, what's interesting is it's not beta anymore. You're not building in things that need to be found or feedback that is about the entire thing that you just did. It's actually just small incremental change. And admittedly, in that 50 deployments a day, about 40 or so of them were refactorings on the back end. Okay, they weren't forward-facing to the user. But you see a lot of companies doing this. Flickr did that. You had a lot of companies who did this. Gmail, they can deploy within 50 minutes, right? So it's one of those things where you have to figure out what's the right cadence, what are you trying to do, do you have integrity when you do it? And this is all the starting point to get there. In fact, on our product, we have a SaaS product. And in our SaaS product, we deploy every day, multiple times a day, sometimes 10 times a day. And we're a startup, we're a small team, but that's how we work. If we can't get it to production, in fact, their whole idea is that they don't even have staging environments or test environments. It's from here to there, and everything else is a lie. Now, you hear Eric Ries, and you think I'm a little bit controversial. He's controversial, and I believe entirely in his method, by the way. Everything else is a lie. If it doesn't work in production, it's a lie.
All right, so plenty of time if you do have time, Chris, we can try to wrap it good for a little bit. But we do have the door prize. And then
yeah, by the way, my marketing hat goes on for a sec, agileadvantage.com if you guys want to talk more. And I have a blog also if you want to just go find information. I have blogs from years and years, gettingagile.com. So definitely there's lots of information there.
So we put in our normal order on the pizzas. And about half of the normal crowd showed up. So we have 4 extras.